Today on Diabetes Connections Type 2, my guest is Matt Friedman, an expert in public relations who lives with diabetes. We get his take on what's going on in that industry these days with social media, crisis control, and even AI. Of course, we'll talk about diabetes and the specific bone Matt has to pick with restaurants. I want to know if you can relate. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Hello and welcome to Diabetes Connections Type 2. I am your host, Stacey Sims, and for more than 8 years now, I have hosted another podcast for people who live with Type 1 or who use insulin. My background is in broadcasting, and that show, which I still do, called just Diabetes Connections, is news and information focused. And that's what I hope to bring to this relatively new podcast. We started this show back in November, just last year. And I do love talking about technology, and the majority of these episodes are going to be about management tools and techniques. But I've also learned that personal stories, talking to people just living with diabetes can be extremely helpful. And this episode is one of those people-focused ones. First, though, let's jump in, as we always do, with just a little bit of education. This week, I want to talk about carbs. It seems like it's simple, right? We all eat carbs. We all know what they are. But they're really important to people with diabetes. So let's break it down a little bit. Carbs, like fats and proteins, are essential macronutrients for balanced eating and nutrition. Quite often, people with diabetes, especially type 1, are taught to count carbohydrates rather than sugar. Well, carbohydrates are molecules of sugar. Your body can use the molecules immediately for energy or store them in the liver and muscles. A lot of people are really afraid of carbs, or they don't want to eat any carbs, but they're important because they provide glucose as the body's primary fuel source. They possess specific vitamins and minerals, and they have fiber. But there are different types of carbs. There are actually 3, and we've already mentioned 2. Sugar, simple carb, starch, complex carb, and fiber, which is also a complex carbohydrates. So when you think about a simple sugar, that's like a soda or cookies or a really sugary breakfast cereal. A complex carb is actually going to help you digest slower. And they're called complex because they are actually built in a more complicated way. Complex carbs have 3 or more glucose units linked together, creating what looks like a chain. These chains are longer than the chains of simple carbs, which might just be 1 or 2. So they take longer to break down. So as we said, they take longer to digest. Now, one note here, it's important to remember that everything you eat eventually breaks down into glucose, even food that is super low carb or no carb, things like steak or chicken or veggies. We're going to talk about absorbing carbs and fat and protein on another show, but just know that it really does all affect your glucose levels. So if you're eating really low carb and you're not seeing the results you think you should be, definitely talk to your doctor. But please be careful about trying to eliminate carbs or only eating one type of carb. This is definitely a dietitian or doctor level conversation. This information comes from Beyond Type 1. I'm a big fan of their information, as well as Beyond Type 2. I'm going to link all of that up in the show notes. All right, up next, I am talking to Matt Friedman. He is the co-owner of the PR firm Tanner Friedman. And he was diagnosed with type 2 not that long ago, right after he turned 50. I should tell you, I have known Matt forever. We went to college together. We've eaten a lot of pizza and wings together. But when I started the show, I knew I wanted to talk to him because he's very open about his diabetes. He's got a really interesting job that we talk a lot about here. And he also has a real issue with some restaurants. I do need to give you a little bit of an update. As you probably know, like most podcasters, I tape these episodes in advance. But I taped this interview with Matt all the way back in June of 2023. And I bring that up because in the interview, you'll hear he talks about his A1C and medications he's on. And that was accurate at the time. But with 6 months now gone by, Matt wanted to let me know, and I can pass along to you, his A1C is down to 5.4. Pretty amazing stuff. His doctor did change up his medication. I don't think it changes the crux of the interview, but I just thought it was important to share because, a lot can change in 6 months, and it's always worth talking to your doctor if you think you can get better results. And you will hear from Matt right after this. US Med sets the bar high when it comes to diabetes care. US Med excels in customer satisfaction, ranking #1 in Dexcom customer surveys. And online, they're #1 in Google and Facebook customer ratings among large national diabetes DMEs. With over 1 million satisfied diabetes customers since 1996, they've perfected the art of delivering better service and better care. From insulin pumps to diabetes testing supplies and the latest CGMs like Freestyle Libre 2 and the Dexcom G6, they've got you covered. Plus, they accept Medicare nationwide and collaborate with over 800 private insurers. US Med, your trusted partner in diabetes care. Your health, satisfaction, and peace of mind are their priority. Visit usmed.com/Stacy. That's usmed.com/STACEY. Matt, thanks for joining me. I appreciate you spending some time with me and my listeners today.
Thank you, Stacy. It's always good to talk to you and try to make some sense out of what I do for people who don't always get it.
Well, and let's start right there. What is public relations? I mean, what's the difference between like PR and marketing?
Everybody has a different definition of this, depending, I think, on where you fall along the continuum. And when I have to explain this to prospective clients, what I say is that PR is the soft marketing, if you have to place it somewhere on that marketing continuum. But the way I like to explain it is that PR is about connecting audiences with messages. What do you want to say and who do you think needs to hear it? And how can we make that connection so your audience hears from you? And I think that marketing is typically used much more to support sales, and PR can be used to support every part of the business. And it's a really fast evolving profession right now and is really different from when I started 25 years ago, because then it was almost all about securing news coverage. That was really the way to reach just about every audience, was through what we now call traditional media. Back then, we just called it the media. And now there are so many different platforms and so many different ways of reaching audiences. It's all about being credible and being authentic and having a message that audiences will really relate to. But we have so many options available to us now that I think are under the PR realm. Marketing can use them too, but we, I think, connect in different ways.
It's interesting that you started in this 25 years ago, just at the point where I was thinking what I was doing in media 25 years ago. I think I was pretty much learning how to put everything I did in a newsroom on a website. Mm-hmm. So it was pretty much before social media, some chat rooms and things like that. But the timing of that is fascinating because that's when everything just kind of started changing at this accelerated pace. Do you remember a time when maybe in the 2000s or sometime when you thought this is really different, right? I mean, when social media hit or something like that.
Yeah, it was even before social media. I think when we realized that something online was not a consolation prize, that's when the light bulb really went off for me as a communicator and said, wow, this is not a secondary way of receiving information. This is a primary way. And, email started to really matter. And websites started to really matter. And online news was better and faster and more efficient than any other form of news. And all those things started to converge way before social media existed. And that's really when I could tell that things were different and there was a handwriting on the wall. And really, that's one of the things that led to my business partner and I starting our own firm in 2007, is we saw that the world was changing. And the people working with at the time weren't as interested in that as we were.
I noticed recently you mentioned online that you stopped getting a newspaper.
I did.
Tell me about that.
This was a big moment. I grew up reading newspapers. I was raised by people who read newspapers, who were raised by people who read newspapers, and on and on and on. And I figured out ways to get the paper delivered to me when I lived in a fraternity house. I had it delivered to me when I worked in broadcast news, and there were stacks of them when I got there. Yeah. But I liked to read the paper before I went to work and even on the weekends. And the economics of print media apparently don't work anymore because it costs a lot more to get the paper delivered, even one day a week here in the Detroit area, than it does to get a full electronic subscription. Twice as much, by the way, to get the paper delivered once a week than to read it online every day. And I just decided to read it online every day. And I now have to develop some new habits 7 days a week I'm still a news consumer. If I'm awake, I'm consuming news and on my phone or on my laptop or some way. In my car radio, I still listen to that. But it's had to be different. And the industry is pushing that way, even for those of us who went kind of kicking and screaming.
Yeah, I have to laugh a little bit because I do remember getting 2 newspapers a day more than 20 years ago. But I definitely stopped my paper subscription a long time ago.
I admit, I was a late adopter to this, and the industry doesn't really seem to care. And the irony is they still make a lot of money from that print publication and advertising. They're just not as interested in printing it and delivering it as they used to.
You talked about consuming news on your phone, on your laptop. I mean, most people do not read the traditional paper, at least by itself, every day. There's so many places to get news. How does PR work when subjects, let's call them, can reach people directly? I mean, you can jump on TikTok and get 1 million views. So how does traditional PR play into that?
We talk to clients all the time about really focusing in on the audiences that they want to reach with a particular story or a particular message. And we talk about reaching them through personal media, not mass media. And, the days of getting a news story in the Sunday paper and on the 11 o'clock news and being able to reach everybody are over. They have been for a long time. And so now it's about how do we reach the audience? And sometimes it's through what we call owned media, the channels that a company or a business or a nonprofit controls, their social media platforms, their website, their email distribution, their newsletter, their events. And it isn't just up to news people to tell their stories anymore. And guess what? The news people can't tell all the stories anymore. They don't employ enough people to do it anymore. Yeah. They can't carry all the water themselves, even if the marketplace wanted them to. It's really a much different conversation now about how to get news out and how to reach audiences because there's so much available to us. One of the things I talk to clients a lot about about half of what I do involves times of adversity or change, bad news or change, which can be perceived as bad news. And we now have to talk about starting from the inside out. And employee communication, internal communication is so important. And direct customer communication in a time of change is so important. And these are things, again, that we didn't talk as much about 20, 25 years ago. Everything was about press releases and news articles. And that's just not realistic anymore.
Can you think of a public case? I mean, it could be a client, but I'm also thinking maybe a big story you've seen in the news that a crisis or a change was not handled well?
Oh, well, it happens all the time. And those are the ones I'm asked to talk about. Those are obvious. It's every once in a while I'm asked, tell me about a crisis that was handled well. And when they're handled well, you don't really even notice. They go away very quickly, or they never rise to the surface. I would say just in general, almost every political crisis is handled poorly because the political playbook is not equipped for the new environment. The political playbook says that in a time of crisis, the candidate or the elected official is supposed to deny the bad news, whatever it is, and attack the accuser. And that just doesn't work anymore. The individuals, the companies, the brands, the charities, whoever it is that are facing adversity, if they can own it and they can accept it and they can communicate about it, it goes away relatively quickly. But the pages of news, whether online or otherwise, are littered with crises and bad news that are not handled well. Chances are, if you remember it, not handled well. That's the barometer.
That makes a lot of sense. Have you ever had a time when you've been pretty sure that the roadmap points one way and the client is adamant that they're going to go another way? I mean, you have to name names, but I'm curious if you've ever given somebody advice and they've ignored you and it's not gone well.
Yeah, it has happened. And if they're paying the bill, they have the right to pay for advice and ignore it. But we have had to fire clients over the years, which is very hard. It's tough. It's like breaking up is hard to do, is what the old song said. And that's true in business too. There's sometimes where the disagreements philosophically are so profound that it leads to the ending of the relationship. And that has happened on multiple occasions since we've had this firm over 16 years. And sometimes it's necessary. And I've actually talked to business people in other professions about this because they know that we've done this. It's kind of uncommon in professional services. Most people just suffer through bad relationships. Life is too short. The career is too short. The other thing that happens, Stacey, is that bad clients suck energy away from good clients. That energy should be used to help good clients achieve their goals. Instead, it's wasted on bad clients. So normally getting rid of a bad client is like a jolt of energy. And that's the reason to do it, even though it's really hard to do.
Tanner Friedman does a lot. We're talking about public relations. You've mentioned media relations, change, communication, and crisis, that kind of thing. I'm curious if you have advice when it comes to social media on an individual level. If someone is thinking about, at this point, I think we all think we know, right? Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, whatever, how we are perceived. But any advice for individuals who are employees or perhaps they own their own business, but when they're posting, at this point we should know, but anything you keep seeing?
I keep seeing people getting into wars on social media with people they don't know at all or barely know. It's just not worth it. Whatever momentary thrill it gives you is not worth it. And I've never seen anybody get into something like that and have it result in a benefit to their life or their career. And so you have to be able, if you decide you want to be active on any of those platforms, you have to have a thick skin or decide just not to engage. And there's a lot of outrage entertainment that goes on with people, and you can get sucked into that pretty easily. So I think we're all pretty well schooled in the fundamentals now of what to post and what not to post and oversharing and all those things. And it's like you either get it now or you don't. But the one temptation that's always out there are the trolls. Somebody who went to high school with somebody you used to work with who's attacked you on their Facebook page. And you just have to learn to leave it alone or delete it or walk away or somehow not get into that. It's just bad for everybody, except for the person who started the fight. They enjoy it. Otherwise, it ruins the experience for everybody else.
With all of the social media and everything else that's out there, what do you think the future of your industry is? As you said, you've been doing this for 25 years. What's going to happen in the next 25? I want to tell you about AG1, the daily foundational nutrition supplement that supports whole body health. It makes me feel like I'm doing something good for my body, right? I'm giving it the nutrition it craves. AG1 is a science-driven formulation of vitamins, probiotics, and whole food-sourced nutrients. It helps you build your health foundation first. I get the travel packs, so I don't have to miss a day, and it just tastes great. If you want to take ownership of your health, it starts with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase. Go to drinkag1.com/Stacey. That's drinkag1.com/STACEY. Check it out.
Now, I think that if someone's career is only focused on one aspect of this business, that they're going to have a hard time. So the social media expert of 2010, the social media guru from back then, is going to have a tough time making a living, I think, in the next 10 years as these platforms contract and change, as was probably inevitable. If you're a really good publicist and you've spent your whole career exclusively doing media relations, you're probably going to have a hard time as the media business continues to struggle and contract and consolidate. And so it's important, I think, to be versatile, but more than anything, what I'm banking on, because I'd like to continue to do this, even after I need to do it, I want to do it, is to be a counselor and to be able to use all of this experience to help companies, businesses, nonprofits, other types of organizations be successful when it comes to communications, whatever that looks like in 10 years or beyond. And we know it's going to be different. We just don't know how yet. We don't know what kind of a role AI is going to play, what kind of a role virtual reality is going to play. We don't know what's going to pass for news. The cable bundle is an endangered species, and how is that going to affect the rest of the media business? It probably won't be good. I think it's the experience and the know-how and the knowledge economy part of this industry that's going to survive. That's what I'm betting on anyway.
I am a little embarrassed to tell you, or reluctant to tell you, that I did use ChatGPT to write some news releases for me this year. And I had it generate them, and then I spruced them up. But they were surprisingly decent. I was really shocked.
Yeah, that could be. I mean, I went to speak to an MBA class about all this a couple of weeks ago, and they asked me if I'm worried. And I said, I'm not really worried.
Yeah.
Because I still think that somebody like me, or those of us, who've been doing this a long time, who've learned from our experience, will still be able to provide that sort of counsel. But what I'm worried about is the young person trying to make it in the business. And as a young person, we all started by doing the first drafts of everything and letting the more experienced people polish it and take it the rest of the way. And what if robotics can do those first drafts? What does the young professional do at that point? And that's kind of scary for the next generation. I feel less so for me. Now, who knows? Maybe some client will terminate my contract and will use some kind of software robotics instead. I don't know. Maybe that could happen. But overall, I feel better now doing this at this point than I would if I was just out of school.
Let's talk a little bit about diabetes. How did you find out that you had it? Typical doctor's exam, typical doctor's visit, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in annual physicals. I have family history that made me a big believer in it. And so my annual physical, the week that I turned 50, I was told that I had crossed the Mendoza line of blood sugar. And at that moment, I was barely, but I was type 2 diabetic at that moment. Now, I had been told for a couple of years that I was pre-diabetic. And admittedly, I kind of blew that off. I thought of it as like the PSAT, that it didn't really count. And maybe they need to call it something different. I don't know. On that day, I decided I was going to have to change the way that I ate. And I was immediately prescribed 3 medicines. I'm still on 2 of those medicines. And I got to keep an eye on my blood sugar at least at 90-day intervals to see what happens. And because I changed the way I eat and because I'm compliant with my medicines, I'm now below that Mendoza line. In fact, I'm barely pre-diabetic at this point. But I have to keep doing this to make sure that I eliminate the worry of diabetes. So I guess, I hit that number in one blood test, and that makes me diabetic. But day to day, and I guess day to day, I live as if I'm diabetic based on the way that I eat. But otherwise, I'm just trying to stay healthy.
Yeah.
And,
do you mind if I ask what medication you're taking?
Yeah, I take metformin, and then I'm taking a statin. And then there's another medicine that I take that I've taken for years for triglycerides. All of these things combined have my labs in really good shape, like the best of my adult life. And not eating sugar and carbs is probably a factor in that too. I've been really adherent to that. And it's been hard, but I haven't had a dream about bread in more than a year. So that's good.
And how long, how old are you? How long ago was this diagnosis?
So I'm about halfway through being 51. So this has been a year and a half of this. And it's been referred to as a lifestyle change, but it really isn't. It's really just the way I eat. I'm a big food guy. So yeah, I don't want to minimize that, but I don't look at this as a lifestyle change. I'm still married to the same woman. I drive the same car. I have the same career.
Well, I hope when you got your diagnosis, you didn't think you had to leave your wife and drive a truck.
Lifestyle change. I'm like, what am I driving around in a convertible with a young woman or something? I've changed the way I eat, and it's inconvenient, but I think it's going to be worth it. That's the trade-off that I'm making.
All right. So if diabetes needs some public relations help, and I believe it does, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what could we do to help it out, to get more people to understand?
Here's my biggest frustration being a part of this now. It's hard to eat out, which I do. I need to, and I do. And it's really expensive. And, the irony is that this is a lot more common than other afflictions where the restaurant industry has totally bent. For example, gluten-free. You can get gluten-free stuff everywhere. And I don't want to minimize the significance of gluten allergies and what can happen to people who are allergic to gluten if they eat it. I get it. I have some of that in my family. I get it. It's really hard. But diabetes is really common. And there are places where you can't substitute. Or if you do, it costs a lot more money to try to substitute. And I think that there needs to be some more cultural awareness of this. And some of it might be regional. I've been to California, and cauliflower rice is much easier to find there than it is here, for example. Even like whole wheat bread, which, I'm told that if I eat whole wheat bread because of the fiber, if I really am in the mood for bread, get whole wheat, get pumpernickel, that kind of stuff. Even that's hard to find. Brioche, meanwhile, is everywhere. So I think that as a society, we need to grapple with this and understanding how common it is and probably will be for the foreseeable future, I think could go a long way, because I think that the food business would probably accommodate this more if there was more awareness of how common it is. And by the way, those who are above that Mendoza line, if they were to change their diet, the marketplace would have to respond to that too. But instead, I think what a lot of people do is they just go along with what's in front of them. I was talking to my doctor about this. A lot of people can't afford to eat right with this condition. It's a lot more expensive to eat the right foods than it is if you're on a tight budget. You're going to eat the worst possible foods for you if you have this particular blood sugar issue. And that's hard too. I don't know what we do about that.
Yeah, no, that's definitely it's a huge issue.
So I'm lucky I can afford to eat the way that I need to eat.
I totally get it, Matt. I mean, it's interesting that you use gluten as the example, because I eat a gluten-free diet and it is amazing to me. I don't have celiac, I have a wheat sensitivity. It is amazing how easy it is to do. So I hear you, and it would be incredible if restaurants and, other establishments would really help to try to have things like you said, cauliflower rice, that sort of stuff. It would be so helpful. So that's a great point. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate your time and all of the sharing. If I have a crisis in communications, I will call you. Let's hope it never comes to that. Only good stuff. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you. Tell your friends with budgets, please. I appreciate that.
I'm going to link up some more information about some of the things we talked about. I'll link up Matt's firm as well, your friends with budgets. But you can just head over to diabetes-connections.com, click on the Type 2 show, or whatever podcast app you're listening to right now. There is usually like a learn more or show notes attached to that. I'm also going to link up more about menu labeling and nutrition information at restaurants and some of the requirements if you'd like to learn more about that. If you like what you heard, please share the show with somebody touched by diabetes. I really appreciate the great feedback I've already received from this show, and I'm excited that we're finding a bigger audience now. We are just beginning. All right, thank you to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here soon. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.